a life savings up in smoke. Amid the destruction, some creation. Lambs born minutes before the truce began. We're only about 700 meters from the border between Gaza and Israel here, and quite clearly there's been close quarters combat here. These are the cartridge cases from a light machine gun. Close by, a race to drag the dying back from the brink. As a masked militant gunman saunters off to a new position, ready for when the battle begins again. 4 hours before the ceasefire, a massive bomb dropped here. Mid-morning, rescuers struggle to burrow in. Residents unhappy with us filming as they pull out a survivor. We pulled out 7 bodies, one of them still alive, another still under the rubble, he says. Next door, the Al-Zanins tiptoe through the debris. Mohammed has rescued the family patriarch. My granddad would say we're in God's hands. We've lost our money, but the most important thing is you're still alive, he says. He salvaged birth certificates, school diplomas too. People with no state, desperate for every scrap of paper to prove they still exist. In the hallway, a female relative begs us to feel her pain. Back in the rubble, a man gestures why. His neighbour believes the answer is simple. Do you think there can be peace between Israel and the Palestinian people?
Yes. 2 countries, Palestinian and Israeli. Why this?
But for now, all they can do is believe they can rise from their ruins. And right now, the warring sides are trying hard to reduce even more of the Gaza Strip to ruins. The war is back on after that Israeli unilateral ceasefire was now suspended. The Israeli military said that they suspended that unilateral ceasefire offer because of Hamas rocket fire. The Israelis said incessant Hamas rocket fire. In fact, just in the last few moments on the Hamas website, their Al-Qassam military brigade said that about 2 hours ago they launched 5 rockets into Israel, and also just after the end of Saturday's ceasefire they say that they launched more than 12 rockets towards Israel. That said, however, Hamas in the course of the night says that they always believed that this continued extended ceasefire offer from Israel was lopsided. Why? Because under that ceasefire offer, Israel retained the right to destroy militant tunnels and militant rocket launchers inside of Gaza while obliging Hamas to cease its fire totally. That is why Hamas was not on board with this ceasefire, and the war very much goes on, George.
And Carl, as your story ran, we were looking at live images right beside it of the smoke billowing there in Gaza. You know, the Gaza Strip, you know, roughly close to 2 million people there, restricted access getting in and out. What is the feeling of people? Are people supporting Hamas, pointing out the fact, obviously, that Hamas rejected the previous ceasefire?
Yeah, I think there are a number of strands to that question. And anecdotally, what I can tell you is that yesterday, for example, I saw a woman sifting through the debris of her home. It was the first time she'd seen her home in days, and she was clearly grief-stricken by what she saw. She raised her hand, she was angry, she was cursing the international community for not coming to Gaza's rescue. She was cursing the various militant factions in Gaza for not standing and defending her home. That said, I would not necessarily say that that translates into a groundswell of opposition against the kind of campaign that Hamas is waging right now, because although during peace times there may be some political and social opposition to Hamas because of its orthodox political and religious style, when it comes down to confrontation with Israel, when it comes down to pushing for the basic rights of the Gaza people, then that is a unifying factor. The war against Israel has unified a lot of these disparate militant factions. It's also unifying a lot of social and political opinion, especially because the political wing of Hamas right now, in some sense, answers, is presenting this as a war to end all wars. What the Hamas politicians are saying is we will not cease fire until Israel finally lifts what Hamas calls the blockade of Gaza, allowing better living conditions for the people of Gaza, freeing up those borders so people can move around, so that goods and services can come in. And so Hamas is saying, and to some extent the people seem in agreement with that, that this war has started, sacrifices are already being made, so let's make this count for something. Let us win some better living conditions for the Gazan people, because what all of them say is going back to the status quo, going back to the situation as it was almost 3 weeks ago now, is just not an option. George?
And Carl, the other question, going back a day ago, the focus was on humanitarian aid, getting medics in to the people who need it. Can you talk to us about the situation of the medics there and the innocent, the victims, the people that we're seeing in your report? What's the condition of the medics just getting to people who need help?
Yeah, I think you're bang on there, George. We can't overstate the impact that this confrontation has had on the civilian population. We've now gone beyond 1,000 people killed in this confrontation. Yesterday, during that 12-hour ceasefire, more than 150 more bodies were pulled from under the rubble, and I suspect there are many more under there as well. But according to the United Nations, 75% of the dead and wounded have been civilians. Within that figure, 1/4 of the dead and wounded have been children. Those are staggering figures. But of course, as you get hundreds, thousands of wounded, because there have been more than 6,000 wounded now, as they flood into Gaza's hospitals. Those hospitals were already stretched because of what is called the blockade on Gaza, and so you get a flood of dead and injured coming into those hospitals. The medics have to work hard. They're short of operating theatres, they're short of supplies. One medic told me, he said, if this war goes on 1 week longer, we will run out even of sutures to stitch up the wounded. Not even anesthetics. Instead of applying general anesthetics now, a lot of them are applying lumbar anesthetics. They've not got the basic medical supplies. And these doctors are working around the clock. One doctor said to me, he said, you know, I don't know how we're staying awake. Only God is keeping me on my feet. Another doctor said to me, he said, we're tired, we're exhausted, we're depressed and anxious, because it's not only their physical well-being, but the kind of horrors that they're seeing coming into their hospital. And it makes a lot of them angry. They are angry at war, George, but they are exhausted as well.
Carl Pinhall giving us the images and the voices of people who are undergoing the bombardment. Carl, thank you for your reporting.
So, where does it go from here? Our Candy Crowley will be speaking to the conflict's major players on CNN State of the Union in just a few hours, including Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Palestinian Minister Mohammed Ishtaya will also be on the program with Candy. And with the White House perspective, she'll be joined by U.S. Deputy National Security Advisor Ben Rhodes. That airs at 9 a.m. and noon Eastern Time in the U.S. and at 2 p.m. in London. Well, there's more to come here, an update on a heartbreaking story we've been telling you about. The parents of a flight